I never thought my own parents would betray me like this. There I was, sitting in my hotel room in Denver, scrolling through my security camera footage from home, when I saw something that made my blood run cold. My mother was standing in my living room, pointing at my guest bedroom while talking to my father and my unemployed brother Jake. Once everything is here, she will not make a scene. She will just accept it, Mom said with a calculating smile that I had never seen before. They were planning to move Jake into my house permanently, while I was away on business banking on my conflict-avoiding personality, to just roll over and accept their decision. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. My name is Fletcher, and at 32 years old, I thought I had finally built the life I wanted. As a software engineer for a major tech company in Portland, Oregon, I had worked my way up from entry-level coding to senior architect. My house in the Cedar Hills neighborhood represented everything I had accomplished through years of 60-hour weeks and careful financial planning. The 3-bedroom craftsman-style home with its updated kitchen and finished basement was my sanctuary, a place where I could decompress from the pressures of managing million-dollar software projects. But as I sat in that sterile Denver hotel room, watching my family violate everything I held sacred, I realized how naive I had been about their true intentions. The security system I had installed 6 months earlier was supposed to give me peace of mind during business trips, not reveal the depth of my family's deception. I rewound the footage to the beginning, determined to understand the full scope of their betrayal. What I discovered made me physically ill. 3 weeks earlier, the day after I had mentioned my upcoming Denver trip at Sunday dinner, my parents had used their emergency key to enter my house. They claimed they were watering my plants, but the cameras told a different story. My mother, Patricia, had walked through each room like a real estate agent, appraising property. She measured the guest bedroom with a cloth tape, took photos of the furniture arrangement, and even opened my closets to assess storage space. My father, Dennis, had inspected the garage, noting where they could temporarily store items during the moving process. Their systematic evaluation of my home felt like a violation that went beyond simple trespassing. The footage from the second week showed them bringing Jake for what they called a family visit. Jake, my 28-year-old brother who had been fired from his 3rd job this year, wandered through my house like he was already living there. He commented on my entertainment system, suggested where he would put his gaming setup, and even discussed converting my home office into his bedroom, since it had better natural light. During that visit, I watched my mother explain their strategy in painful detail. Fletcher never confronts anyone directly, she told Jake while sitting on my couch. He hates conflict more than anything else. Once you are already moved in, he will grumble for a few days, but he will adapt like he always does. Her words stung because they contained enough truth to be effective manipulation. My father nodded in agreement, adding his own insights into my character weaknesses. Remember when we convinced him to co-sign your car loan? He complained about the risk, but he did it because he did not want to seem selfish. This is the same principle, just bigger. They were discussing me, like I was a psychological case study, rather than their son and brother. The 3rd week of footage showed their final preparations. Jake brought his girlfriend Stephanie to check out the space, though I learned later that she had already kicked him out of her apartment. My parents discussed the moving timeline settling on the 2nd day of my business trip to ensure I would be gone long enough for them to complete the transition. What made their betrayal even worse was their casual dismissal of my right to choose. When Jake expressed some hesitation about the ethics of their plan, my mother shut him down immediately. "Fletcher has been helping you financially for years," she said. "This is just the next logical step. He has a 3-bedroom house and lives alone. It is selfish for him to keep all that space to himself when his brother needs help." They had twisted my previous generosity into evidence of my obligation to provide unlimited support. Every time I had helped Jake with rent money or grocery bills during his unemployment periods, they had interpreted it as proof that I would accept any imposition on my life. My kindness had become their justification for exploitation. As I watched the final piece of footage from just hours before showing them loading boxes into their truck, I felt something shift inside me. The passive conflict-avoiding Fletcher they were counting on no longer existed. They had pushed me past my breaking point, and now they were about to discover what happens when a patient person finally reaches their limit. I closed my laptop and began planning my counterattack. They wanted to ambush me with their scheme banking on my tendency to avoid confrontation. But this time, I was going to turn their strategy against them. If they wanted to play games with my life and property, I would show them what happens when someone with my analytical skills and resources decides to fight back. The trap was about to be set, and my family had no idea what was coming for them. The first step in my counterplan required careful research and preparation. From my hotel room, I called my boss and explained that I needed to extend my trip by 1 day due to client requirements. This gave me the cover story I needed while secretly changing my return flight to come back a day early. I made sure to post on social media about how busy the Denver project was keeping me, establishing my supposed location for anyone monitoring my activities. Next, I contacted my lawyer friend Marcus, who specialized in property and tenant law. Hypothetically, I asked him during our phone call, if someone moved into a house without the owner's permission, what would be the legal implications? Marcus explained that once someone establishes residency, even for a single night, the eviction process becomes complicated and lengthy. In Oregon, I would need to provide 30 days written notice, and if Jake refused to leave, I would have to go through formal court proceedings that could take months. This information confirmed my worst fears about my family's strategy. They were not planning a simple favor or temporary arrangement. They were executing a calculated takeover of my home, knowing that once Jake was established as a resident, removing him would be nearly impossible. My mother's psychology degree was finally being put to use, just not in the way her professors had intended. I spent the next several hours researching my options and discovered something interesting. Since Jake would be moving in without a lease agreement and without paying rent, he would be considered a trespasser rather than a tenant if I could prove I never gave permission. The security footage of their planning conversations would be crucial evidence of the premeditated nature of their scheme. My next call was to my Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, who owned a successful construction company in Portland. Robert and my father had been estranged for 5 years, following a business disagreement, but Robert had always maintained a good relationship with me. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate and furious. "Those entitled idiots!" Robert said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built his business by standing up to people who tried to take advantage of him. "Dennis always was a manipulator, but Patricia has turned it into an art form. They think they can just steamroll over everyone because they are family." His anger on my behalf gave me strength for what was coming. Robert agreed to help with my plan, offering both his construction expertise and his moral support. "You should not have to deal with this alone," he said. "Family means helping each other, not helping yourself to each other's property." His distinction between genuine family support and exploitation clarified something I had been struggling to understand. I also contacted my security company explaining that I wanted to upgrade my system while I was away. They agreed to install additional hidden cameras in strategic locations, giving me comprehensive coverage of every room. The technician who handled the installation was discreet and professional, understanding that family security issues sometimes required extra precautions. During my research, I discovered something that made my anger burn even hotter. My parents had been telling extended family members that I had already agreed to let Jake move in. My cousin Sarah mentioned it casually during a text conversation, congratulating me on finally stepping up for family. When I probed further, I learned they had been using my previous financial help to Jake as evidence of my commitment to supporting him long-term. They had turned my private generosity into public obligation, creating social pressure that would make it harder for me to refuse their scheme. Every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every casual conversation had become part of their manipulation campaign. They were not just invading my home, they were weaponizing my relationships against me. The final piece of my preparation involved documenting everything. I created detailed files of all the security footage timestamped and organized by date. I printed copies of relevant tenant law statutes and property rights information. I prepared a comprehensive timeline of their deception, from the first unauthorized entry to their current moving day plan. As I worked through the night in my hotel room, I felt a strange sense of clarity that I had never experienced before. For years, I had avoided conflict because I thought it was the mature, responsible thing to do. I had absorbed their criticism, accepted their demands, and sacrificed my own needs to keep peace in the family. But now, I understood that my conflict avoidance had not been kindness. It had been cowardice that enabled their worst behaviors. They had mistaken my patience for weakness and my generosity for stupidity. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference between someone who chooses not to fight and someone who cannot fight. The analytical skills that made me successful in software architecture were about to be applied to a very different kind of problem, and my family was not prepared for the systematic approach I was planning. The trap was set, and in a few hours, they would walk directly into it. Moving day arrived with the crisp October weather that made Portland famous. From my hotel room, I watched the live feed as a large rental truck pulled into my driveway at exactly 9 in the morning. My parents had timed everything perfectly, arriving early enough to complete their scheme, but late enough to avoid suspicious neighbors who might be leaving for work. My father climbed out of his sedan, first checking his watch, and surveying the neighborhood with the careful attention of someone planning a covert operation. My mother emerged from the passenger seat, carrying a clipboard and what appeared to be a detailed moving plan. They had approached this invasion with the same methodical preparation I used for software project management, except they were applying their skills to violating my trust and property. Jake arrived 15 minutes later in a pickup truck loaded with furniture and boxes. Behind him, 2 hired movers in a smaller truck waited for direction. The scale of their operation shocked me. This was not a temporary arrangement or emergency housing situation. They had planned a complete relocation that would establish Jake as a permanent resident in my home. I watched through multiple camera angles as my mother produced the emergency key I had given them for plant care during vacations. She held it up, like a trophy, smiling at Jake with obvious pride in her cleverness. "See how easy this is when you plan ahead," she said, her voice clearly captured by the upgraded audio system I had installed. The moment they opened my front door, I felt a surge of rage, unlike anything I had ever experienced. They moved through my entrance hallway, like they owned the place, discussing logistics and furniture placement without a trace of guilt or hesitation. My mother immediately began directing the operation with the efficiency of a military commander. "Jake, your room is the guest bedroom at the end of the hall," she announced, pointing toward the space I used for reading and quiet work. "We measured everything, and your bed will fit perfectly under the window. You will have good light and privacy back there." She had transformed my peaceful retreat into Jake's new headquarters without asking my permission or considering my feelings. Jake wandered through my living room, picking up my belongings and commenting on potential improvements. "This entertainment system is decent," he said, examining my carefully researched sound equipment. "But I have a better gaming setup that would work great in here. Fletcher never uses half this stuff anyway." His casual dismissal of my interests and possessions made my hands clench into fists. My father handled the logistics with business-like precision, coordinating with the movers and checking items off a detailed list. "The garage has enough space for temporary storage," he told them, "and we can use the basement for Jake's exercise equipment and extra furniture." They had evaluated every square foot of my home and assigned it purposes that served their agenda. What made their behavior even more infuriating was their complete confidence in their strategy. They moved through my house without any apparent concern about consequences or my potential reaction. My mother discussed my schedule, openly confirming that I would not return for 4 days, and explaining how my predictable nature would lead me to accept their accomplished fact. Fletcher will be upset initially, she told Jake while unpacking his belongings in my guest bedroom. But he hates confrontation more than he hates inconvenience. Once you are settled and established, he will adapt like he always does. Remember, this is for his own good too. He needs to learn to be less selfish and more family-oriented. Their psychological analysis of my character was accurate enough to be effective manipulation, but they had made one crucial miscalculation. They were basing their strategy on the old Fletcher, the one who had spent years avoiding conflict and absorbing their demands. They had no idea that their betrayal had created a new version of me, one who was prepared to fight for his boundaries and dignity. Jake's casual appropriation of my space continued throughout the morning. He rearranged my furniture to accommodate his belongings, moved my books to make room for his gaming collection, and even criticized my decorating choices. "This place could use some personality," he said, surveying my carefully curated living room. "It looks like a magazine picture instead of somewhere people actually live." The hired movers worked efficiently, under my parents' direction, treating the operation like any other legitimate moving job. They had no way of knowing they were participating in an elaborate property violation. My parents had probably told them I was out of town, but had approved the move, making them unwitting accomplices in the scheme. As the day progressed, I watched my sanctuary being systematically dismantled and reconfigured to serve someone else's needs. My home office became a staging area for Jake's belongings. My quiet guest bedroom transformed into his permanent residence. My garage filled with overflow items that would gradually migrate into the main house as he expanded his territorial claims. But the worst moment came when Jake returned from his truck carrying a large dog crate. Through the cameras, I watched in horror as he released an aggressive-looking pit bull mix into my house. Rex, as Jake called him, immediately began marking his territory on my furniture and walls. Within minutes, he had urinated on my leather couch and begun chewing the corner of my coffee table. "Do not worry about Rex," Jake told my parents, as the dog continued destroying my belongings. "He just needs time to adjust to new places. Fletcher will get used to having him around." The casualness with which they discussed the destruction of my property was the final straw. They were not just taking over my home. They were allowing it to be damaged by an untrained animal I had never agreed to house. My mother's response to the dog's behavior was even more infuriating. "Well, Fletcher needed to replace that old couch anyway," she said, watching Rex tear at the leather cushions. "This will give him motivation to update his decorating." They were treating the destruction of my belongings as a favor, reframing property damage as interior design advice. By the end of the day, they had successfully executed their plan. Jake was moved, and his belongings were distributed throughout my house, and his dog was establishing dominance over my space. They celebrated their success with takeout dinner in my dining room, toasting their clever manipulation and my predictable compliance with the scheme. As I watched them congratulate themselves on their victory, I felt the last traces of doubt about my counterplan disappear. They had chosen this fight, and now they were going to discover what happens when someone with my resources and determination decides to fight back. Tomorrow, their celebration would turn into the worst mistake of their lives. The next morning, I checked out of my Denver hotel and caught the earliest flight back to Portland. During the 5-hour journey, I reviewed my strategy one final time, making sure every element was in place for the confrontation ahead. My hands remained steady as I planned each step, but inside, I felt like a volcano preparing to erupt after years of dormancy. I landed at Portland International at 2:30 in the afternoon and drove directly home, taking the long route through my neighborhood to observe any changes they might have made to my property's exterior. My lawn looked the same, but I noticed Jake's pickup truck parked in my driveway, like he had every right to occupy that space. The sight of his vehicle in my personal parking area triggered a fresh wave of anger that I channeled into cold determination. I parked on the street and used my phone to check the live camera feeds. My family was inside, completely relaxed and confident in their success. Jake was sprawled on my couch, playing video games, his dog, sleeping on my previously pristine carpet. My parents were in the kitchen preparing what appeared to be a celebration lunch, using my groceries and dishware. The scene that greeted me through my front door was worse than the camera footage had suggested. The smell of dog urine permeated the air, mixing with the aroma of my mother's cooking in a nauseating combination. Rex had clearly been marking territory throughout the house, leaving stains on my hardwood floors and area rugs that would require professional cleaning to remove. My living room looked like a college dormitory had exploded inside it. Jake's gaming equipment sprawled across multiple surfaces, connected by tangles of cables that snaked around my furniture. His clothes were scattered on chairs and tables, and empty food containers from the previous night's celebration littered my coffee table. I walked through each room systematically, my phone camera recording everything, while my family remained unaware of my presence. The guest bedroom had been completely transformed into Jake's permanent residence, with his bed dresser and personal items arranged like he had lived there for months. My home office was stacked with his overflow belongings, making it impossible for me to use the space for its intended purpose. The kitchen showed signs of careless use that made my blood pressure spike. Dirty dishes filled my sink, grease stains covered my stove, and someone had spilled something sticky on my granite countertops without cleaning it up. They were treating my home like a rental property rather than someone's personal sanctuary. I found them in my dining room, gathered around my table for what they clearly considered a victory celebration. My mother had prepared a large meal using ingredients from my refrigerator, complete with my good china and silverware. They were laughing and joking about their successful scheme, completely unaware that their celebration was about to become a disaster. Jake saw me first, his face cycling through confusion, panic, and defensive anger in the span of 3 seconds. "Fletcher," he stammered, nearly choking on his food. "You are supposed to be in Denver until Friday. What are you doing here?" My parents turned in their chairs, their expressions shifting from surprise to guilty, to calculating as they realized their timeline had been disrupted. My mother recovered first, her psychology training kicking in, as she attempted to control the narrative. "Fletcher, sweetheart, we were going to call you tonight," she said with a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Jake had an emergency housing situation, and we knew you would want to help family." I stood in the doorway of my own dining room, looking at the 3 people who had systematically betrayed my trust and violated my home. The rage I had been containing for the past day crystallized into something cold and sharp. When I spoke, my voice was calm and quiet, which seemed to unnerve them more than shouting would have. "Emergency," I repeated, pulling out my phone and scrolling to the first piece of security footage. "Is that what you call 3 weeks of planning and preparation? Because I have video evidence that suggests otherwise." I turned the phone screen toward them, showing the footage of my mother measuring my guest bedroom while explaining their psychological manipulation strategy. The color drained from my mother's face as she realized the scope of my knowledge about their scheme. My father began sputtering explanations about family obligations and temporary arrangements, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Temporary," I said, walking over to the window and pointing at the moving truck still parked in my driveway. "Like the furniture you moved into my guest bedroom, like the dog that has been destroying my property, like the celebration dinner you are currently eating in my dining room." Each question was delivered with the same calm precision I used in software architecture meetings when identifying critical system flaws. Jake tried a different approach, appealing to my emotions rather than my logic. "Come on, Fletcher. Family helps family," he said, his voice carrying a whining tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "You have all this space, and you live alone. Mom and Dad thought you would be happy to help me get back on my feet." I pulled up another piece of footage, this one showing Jake discussing where he would put his gaming setup and how he planned to convert my home office into his bedroom. "Get back on your feet," I repeated, showing him the video. "This looks more like getting comfortable in someone else's home, permanently." My mother attempted to regain control of the situation, falling back on the manipulation tactics that had worked for so many years. "Fletcher, I understand you are upset about the surprise, but we knew you would overthink this decision if we asked directly. Sometimes family has to make hard choices for each other. This is what people who love each other do. The psychological manipulation that had controlled me for years suddenly felt transparent and ineffective. I could see the strings she was trying to pull, the guilt buttons she was attempting to push, and the false logic she was using to justify their actions. For the first time in my life, her emotional manipulation bounced off me like rain off a windshield. Love, I said, pulling up the footage of her, explaining how they would exploit my conflict-avoiding personality. Is this what love looks like? Planning to manipulate your son's psychology, to force him into an arrangement he never agreed to? I played the audio of her voice clearly stating that I would just have to accept their decision once it was accomplished. My father tried to interrupt with bluster and authority, but I had reached a point where their old control methods no longer worked. Dennis, I said, using his first name instead of Dad to signal the shift in our relationship dynamic. You are trespassing in my home. All of you are. You used emergency access to violate my trust and privacy, and now you are refusing to leave when asked. The word trespassing seemed to penetrate their defensive rationalizations in a way that emotional arguments had not. They began to realize that their family manipulation tactics might not protect them from legal consequences if I chose to escalate the situation. But the most satisfying moment came when I revealed the final piece of my preparation. By the way, I said, checking my phone with deliberate casualness, Carol has been watching this entire conversation through the live camera feed. I held up my phone, showing them the active video call with my parents' longtime friend, who had been witness to their bragging about their clever manipulation scheme just days earlier. The look of absolute horror on their faces as they realized their humiliation was being broadcast to someone in their social circle was worth every moment of pain and betrayal they had put me through. Their scheme had not only failed, it was now public knowledge among the very people they had been trying to impress with their clever psychology. The trap had been sprung, and there was no escape. The silence that followed my revelation stretched for nearly 30 seconds, broken only by Rex's continued destruction of my living room furniture in the background. My family sat frozen in their chairs, processing the reality that their elaborate scheme had not only failed, but was being witnessed by someone whose opinion they valued in their social circle. I walked to my kitchen counter and retrieved a folder I had prepared during my flight home. Opening it with deliberate ceremony, I pulled out several sheets of paper and placed them on the dining room table in front of my family. These are my demands, I said, my voice maintaining the same calm professional tone I used during high-stakes software negotiations. First, all of Jake's belongings will be removed from my property within 2 hours. Second, you will arrange and pay for professional cleaning to address the damage caused by the unauthorized dog. Third, each of you will provide a written apology, acknowledging that you violated my property rights and trust. Fourth, the emergency key access you abused will be permanently revoked. My mother attempted to interrupt with emotional manipulation, but I continued without acknowledging her protests. These demands are non-negotiable. Failure to comply will result in immediate filing of trespassing charges with the Portland Police Bureau, along with a civil lawsuit for property damage and emotional distress. Jake's response was predictably aggressive, his face reddening as he realized his comfortable new living situation was evaporating. You cannot be serious, Fletcher, he said, standing up from the table and moving toward me in what was clearly intended as an intimidating posture. We are family. Family does not threaten each other with lawyers and police over misunderstandings. Before I could respond to Jake's attempted intimidation, the front door opened and Uncle Robert walked in, followed by 2 of his construction workers. The timing was perfect, exactly as we had planned during our phone conversation the previous evening. Robert surveyed the scene with the disgusted expression of someone who had predicted exactly this outcome. Misunderstanding. Robert repeated his voice, carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades dealing with entitled contractors and difficult clients. Dennis, I warned you 20 years ago that your manipulation tactics would eventually backfire. Today is that day. He handed me a thick manila folder, while his workers positioned themselves strategically near the exits. What is in there? My father asked, his voice betraying nervousness for the first time since my arrival. Robert smiled grimly as I opened the folder to reveal printouts of text messages, emails, and social media posts. Evidence of your lies to extended family, I explained, spreading the documents across the table. For the past month, you have been telling relatives that I agreed to let Jake move in permanently. You used my previous financial help as proof of my commitment to supporting him indefinitely. The documentation was comprehensive and damaging. Text messages to my Aunt Linda, bragging about how they had convinced me to provide Jake with permanent housing. Facebook posts, thanking me for my generosity, before I had even been informed of their plan. Email conversations with cousins explaining how they had successfully manipulated my psychology to get what they wanted. My mother's face went white as she recognized her own words in the printed conversations. Those were private communications, she whispered, as if the privacy of their lies somehow protected them from consequences. Privacy, Robert said with a harsh laugh. Like the privacy Fletcher deserved in his own home. Like the privacy you violated when you used emergency access to plan your invasion. You forfeited any right to privacy when you made Fletcher's business public without his consent. Jake tried a different approach, appealing to Robert as the family elder. Uncle Robert, you do not understand the whole situation. Fletcher has been helping me financially for years. This is just the next step in that support. He can afford it, and I really need the help right now. Robert's response was swift and cutting. Jake, I understand the situation perfectly. You are 28 years old and have been fired from 3 jobs this year. Your girlfriend kicked you out for stealing from her, which Fletcher discovered during his research yesterday. You want free housing because you have burned every other bridge available to you. The revelation about Stephanie kicking Jake out for theft sent shockwaves through the room. My parents had clearly not known about this detail, and their expressions showed they were realizing how much of Jake's story had been fabricated or omitted. Their righteous certainty about helping their son began crumbling as they understood they had been manipulated as well. That is not true, Jake protested, but his defensive tone confirmed Robert's statement. Stephanie and I just had relationship problems. The money thing was a misunderstanding. Robert pulled out his phone and displayed a series of text messages. These are from Stephanie, sent to Fletcher yesterday when he contacted her for background information. She describes exactly how you stole $200 from her purse and used her credit card for online gambling. She has been trying to decide whether to press charges. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jake's foundation of lies was collapsing, taking my parents' moral justification for their scheme down with it. They had based their elaborate manipulation on the belief that they were helping their struggling son, but now they were discovering they had enabled a thief and liar. My father attempted to salvage some dignity from the situation. Even if Jake made mistakes with Stephanie, that does not change the fact that he needs family support right now. Fletcher has the resources and space to help, and family obligations should take priority over personal preferences. I looked at my father with something approaching pity. After decades of using manipulation and emotional blackmail to control family dynamics, he still believed his tactics would work in this situation. Family obligations, I repeated, pulling out my phone to show him the footage of their planning session. Let me play your exact words about family obligations. The video clip showed my father explaining to Jake how they would exploit my psychology to force compliance with their scheme. His voice was clearly audible as he described my conflict avoidance as a weakness they could leverage for their benefit. The casual cruelty in his tone as he discussed manipulating his own son was devastating to watch. That conversation was taken out of context. My father protested weakly, but even he seemed to recognize how hollow his defense sounded. Robert stepped forward, his presence adding weight to the ultimatum I was about to deliver. Context, he said, shaking his head in disgust. There is no context that makes plotting to manipulate your own child acceptable. You used his trust against him, and now you are facing the consequences. I looked at my family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in my adult life. They were not the loving relatives who occasionally made mistakes in their desire to help each other. They were manipulators who had spent years conditioning me to accept their control and sacrifice my own needs for their convenience. You have 2 hours, I said, checking my watch with deliberate precision. If Jake's belongings and his dog are not completely removed from my property by 5 o'clock, I will file criminal trespassing charges. If professional cleaning is not arranged and paid for by tomorrow evening, I will pursue civil damages for property destruction. The finality in my voice seemed to penetrate their defensive denials. For the first time since my arrival, they appeared to understand that their old methods of control would not work in this situation. The passive, accommodating Fletcher they had counted on was gone, replaced by someone who would protect his boundaries, regardless of their emotional manipulation. The counterattack was complete, and their defeat was total. The next 2 hours unfolded like a precisely choreographed dismantling of my family's elaborate scheme. Under Robert's watchful supervision, my parents and Jake began the humiliating process of removing every trace of their attempted takeover from my home. The hired movers, who had returned at my expense to undo their previous day's work, moved efficiently through each room, while my family faced the consequences of their calculated betrayal. Jake's removal process was particularly satisfying to watch. The gaming equipment he had so confidently installed in my living room was carefully disconnected and packed away. His clothes, which had been scattered throughout my house like territorial markers, were hastily stuffed into garbage bags. The bed he had assembled in my guest bedroom was disassembled piece by piece, erasing all evidence of his planned permanent residence. Rex, the aggressive dog whose presence had been the most insulting aspect of their invasion, proved difficult to remove. The animal had become attached to my house and resisted Jake's attempts to coax him back into his crate. After 20 minutes of unsuccessful efforts, Robert's construction worker Tom stepped in with professional animal handling experience, managing to secure the dog safely for transport. The professional cleaning crew I had contacted arrived at exactly 3:30, led by Maria, a restoration specialist who had experience with pet damage and property violations. She assessed the scope of Rex's destruction with clinical precision, documenting urine stains on my hardwood floors, chew damage to my furniture, and the pervasive odor that had penetrated my carpet and upholstery. This will require comprehensive treatment, Maria explained to my parents as they watched her team set up specialized equipment. Enzymatic cleaning for the biological contamination, refinishing for the wood damage, and possible replacement for some textile items. The total cost will likely exceed $1,500. My mother's face went pale as she realized the financial implications of their scheme's failure. $1,500. She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. For cleaning, Maria nodded professionally. Pet damage restoration requires specialized techniques and materials. The longer biological contamination sits, the more extensive the treatment needed. This appears to have been occurring for at least 24 hours, based on the penetration patterns. While the cleaning assessment continued, Jake's emotional state deteriorated rapidly. The reality of his situation was becoming clear. He was not just losing his comfortable new living arrangement, but his homelessness was now public knowledge throughout our extended family network. Every relative who had been told about his successful housing arrangement would soon learn about the deception and failure. "Fletcher, please," Jake pleaded, his earlier aggression replaced by desperate panic. "I know this got complicated, but I really do need help right now. Can we work something out privately? Maybe I could pay rent, or help with housework." I looked at my brother, seeing him clearly, without the filter of family obligation that had obscured my judgment for so many years. "Jake," I said calmly, "you moved into my house without permission. brought an aggressive dog that destroyed my property, and participated in an elaborate scheme to manipulate my psychology. Trust, once broken at this level, cannot be simply repaired with housework arrangements. My parents attempted one final round of emotional manipulation, as their scheme's complete failure became undeniable. My mother tried tears explaining how they had only wanted to help their struggling son and keep the family together. My father attempted authority, demanding that I remember my obligations to blood relatives who had raised and supported me. But their psychological tactics that had controlled me for decades now felt transparent and ineffective. I could see every manipulation technique, every guilt button they were trying to push, every false assumption they were making about my character and motivations. The betrayal had burned away my susceptibility to their control methods. Robert's presence provided crucial moral support during these final manipulation attempts. "Patricia Dennis," he said firmly when their emotional appeals became particularly intense, "Fletcher does not owe you forgiveness for violating his trust and property. Family relationships require mutual respect, which you abandoned when you planned this invasion." The cleaning crew's work revealed the full extent of the damage Rex had caused during his brief residency. Beyond the visible destruction I had witnessed through cameras, they discovered additional problems: scratched hardwood, under-area rugs, damaged drywall where the dog had marked territory repeatedly, and contamination in my bedroom where Rex had apparently spent unsupervised time. The bedroom damage suggests the animal had extended access to private spaces. Maria reported showing me photographs of scratches on my bedroom door and biological stains on my personal carpet. This level of territorial marking indicates the dog was allowed to roam freely throughout the property. This revelation triggered a new wave of anger as I realized the full scope of their disregard for my personal space. They had not just moved Jake into my guest room. They had allowed his untrained dog unrestricted access to my most private areas. The violation felt even more complete and intentional. As 5 o'clock approached, the removal process reached completion. Jake's belongings were loaded into the moving truck, along with Rex's crate and supplies. The guest bedroom stood empty, except for my original furniture, though the lingering odor would require professional treatment to eliminate completely. My parents stood in my driveway, their faces showing a mixture of shame, anger, and disbelief that their carefully planned scheme had resulted in such complete humiliation. They had expected to present me with an accomplished fact that I would reluctantly accept. Instead, they were facing financial consequences, public embarrassment, and the complete destruction of their relationship with me. Jake climbed into his pickup truck, his face dark with resentment and defeat. "This is not over, Fletcher," he said through his rolled-down window. "Family means something, even if you have forgotten that. When you realize how lonely your perfect little life really is, do not expect me to forgive you for this." I watched my brother drive away, understanding that he still did not comprehend the magnitude of their betrayal or accept responsibility for the consequences. In his mind, I was the villain who had rejected family obligations rather than the victim who had defended his basic rights. But the most revealing moment came as my parents prepared to leave. My mother approached me one final time, her expression showing she still believed she could salvage control through emotional manipulation. "Fletcher," she said, reaching toward me as if to offer a hug, "I know you are angry right now, but family forgives and moves forward. When you have had time to calm down and think clearly, you will realize we were only trying to help. This does not have to permanently damage our relationships." I stepped back from her attempted embrace, maintaining the physical and emotional distance that had become necessary for my protection. "Patricia," I said deliberately, using her first name to signal the fundamental change in our relationship dynamic. "Forgiveness requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing and commitment to changed behavior. Until you can honestly admit what you did wrong and why it was unacceptable, there is nothing to discuss." The use of her first name instead of Mom seemed to shock her more than anything else that had happened during the confrontation. She suddenly understood that their manipulation tactics had not just failed temporarily. They had permanently altered the foundation of our relationship. As their car disappeared down my street, I stood in my driveway with Robert surveying the aftermath of their failed invasion. My house was mine again, though the cleaning and repair process would take several days to complete. More importantly, I had discovered something about myself that I had never known before. When pushed beyond my limits, I was capable of protecting my boundaries regardless of family pressure or emotional manipulation. The reckoning was complete, but the real work of rebuilding was just beginning. The week following my family's forced departure brought a strange mixture of peace and processing that I had never experienced before. My house, though still undergoing professional cleaning and repairs, felt truly mine for the first time in years. The absence of family drama and manipulation created a silence that was initially unsettling, but gradually became deeply restorative. Maria's cleaning crew worked for 3 full days to eliminate all traces of Rex's damage and territorial marking. The enzymatic treatment for biological contamination required specialized equipment that filled my house with the low hum of air scrubbers and dehumidifiers. Watching the systematic restoration of my space felt symbolic of the larger healing process I was beginning. The final bill for cleaning and repairs totaled $1,843, including refinishing portions of my hardwood floors and replacing contaminated carpet padding in my bedroom. When I presented this invoice to my parents, along with documentation from the cleaning company, their reaction revealed how little they had considered the practical consequences of their scheme. "Nearly $2,000 for cleaning," my father said incredulously during our phone conversation. "That seems excessive for what amounts to normal pet damage." His continued inability to accept responsibility for the situation confirmed my decision to maintain strict boundaries going forward. "Dennis," I replied using his first name deliberately, "normal pet damage occurs when someone chooses to have a pet in their own home. This was destruction caused by an animal you brought into my house without permission as part of your trespassing scheme." The payment arrived within 48 hours, confirming that despite their protests about the amount, they understood the legal implications of refusing to cover the damages they had caused. More importantly, their prompt payment suggested they were beginning to grasp that their old manipulation tactics would no longer work with me. Uncle Robert proved to be an invaluable ally during this transition period. His construction background had given him experience with family dynamics around property and money, and his estrangement from my parents provided perspective on their long-term behavioral patterns. "Your parents have been using emotional manipulation to control family relationships for decades," he explained during one of our coffee meetings. "Your mother's psychology degree gave her the vocabulary to make their tactics sound caring, but the underlying strategy has always been control through guilt and obligation." Robert's insights helped me understand that my family's betrayal was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of conditioning that had prepared me to accept their violations of my boundaries. The emergency key scheme had only been possible because they had spent decades training me to prioritize their comfort over my own autonomy. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received an unexpected phone call from my cousin Sarah, who had been among the family members told about Jake's supposed housing arrangement. Her call revealed the broader social consequences my parents were facing as word spread about their failed manipulation scheme. "Fletcher," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity, "I owe you an apology. Aunt Patricia told everyone that you had agreed to let Jake move in permanently, and I congratulated you without checking if it was actually true. I had no idea they were planning to ambush you with that arrangement." Sarah's call was followed by similar conversations with other relatives who had been fed false information about my supposed agreement to house Jake indefinitely. Each conversation revealed another layer of my parents' manipulation campaign and helped me understand how they had created social pressure to support their scheme. The most difficult conversation came when Jake's ex-girlfriend Stephanie contacted me directly to apologize for her role in enabling his behavior. Her call provided crucial context about Jake's recent struggles and confirmed that my parents had been given incomplete information about his housing crisis. Jake told your parents that we broke up because of relationship issues. Stephanie explained, her voice tight with anger. He never mentioned that I caught him stealing money from my purse multiple times, or that he used my credit card for online gambling without permission. When I confronted him, he said family would help him get back on his feet financially. Stephanie's revelation confirmed that Jake's housing crisis was not the result of economic hardship or bad luck, but direct consequences of his theft and deception. My parents had based their elaborate scheme on false information, making them victims of Jake's manipulation, even as they were victimizing me. This information led to the most important decision I would make during the entire crisis. Rather than simply maintaining distance from my family, I chose to offer them an opportunity for genuine reconciliation through professional family therapy. The condition was non-negotiable, honest participation in addressing the underlying dynamics that had made their betrayal possible. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the family therapist I selected, specialized in boundary violations and emotional manipulation within family systems. Her initial assessment session with me alone helped establish a framework for potential family healing that would require genuine acknowledgement and changed behavior from my parents and Jake. Family reconciliation after this level of trust violation requires 3 elements, Dr. Martinez explained. First, complete acknowledgement of the wrongdoing without justification or minimization. Second, demonstrated commitment to change behavior over time. Third, respect for the victim's timeline for rebuilding trust, which cannot be rushed or demanded. The family therapy sessions began 6 weeks after the confrontation with my parents, attending reluctantly, and Jake refusing to participate initially. The first several sessions focused on establishing basic facts about what had occurred and why it constituted a serious boundary violation, rather than a family misunderstanding. My mother's psychology training actually worked against her in therapy, as she attempted to use clinical language to minimize their actions or reframe the situation in ways that reduced their responsibility. Dr. Martinez's expertise in manipulation tactics made these attempts unsuccessful and helped my parents understand how their behavior appeared from an objective perspective. The breakthrough came during the 5th session, when my father finally acknowledged the calculated nature of their scheme. We planned it carefully because we knew Fletcher would say no if we asked directly. He admitted, tears in his eyes, for the first time I could remember. We thought we knew what was best for both our sons, but we were wrong to force our decision on someone else's life and property. My mother's acknowledgement took longer and required more therapeutic intervention. Her identity was deeply tied to being a caring mother and family organizer, making it difficult for her to accept that her actions had been manipulative and harmful rather than loving and helpful. I convinced myself that Fletcher needed to learn to be less selfish, she finally said during our 7th session. But I realize now that calling someone selfish for protecting their boundaries is just another manipulation tactic. I was trying to control his decisions by making him feel guilty for having preferences different from mine. Jake's eventual participation in therapy came after he was arrested for check fraud in another city, facing criminal charges that made his previous theft from Stephanie look minor in comparison. The legal consequences of his escalating behavior forced him to confront the pattern of deception and entitlement that had led to the housing scheme. I thought Fletcher owed me support because he was successful and I was struggling, Jake admitted during his first therapy session. But success is not a debt that someone owes to their family members. I was using emotional manipulation to avoid taking responsibility for my own choices and consequences. The therapy process continued for 6 months, with gradually improving communication and understanding between all family members. The sessions helped establish new relationship boundaries based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. Most importantly, they created a framework for healthy family support that protected everyone's autonomy and dignity. My parents began contributing monthly to Jake's court-ordered financial counseling and job training programs, providing genuine help rather than enabling continued irresponsibility. Jake moved into a supervised transitional housing program that required employment and prohibited substance use, giving him structure and accountability he had been lacking. The resolution was not a return to our previous family dynamics, which had been fundamentally unhealthy, but the creation of new relationships based on honest communication and mutual respect. Trust was rebuilt slowly through consistent actions rather than quick apologies or promises. 1 year after the confrontation, my family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner at my house for the first time since the incident. The meal was smaller and quieter than our previous celebrations, but the conversation was more genuine and relaxed than any family gathering I could remember. Fletcher, my mother said as we cleared dishes together, I know our relationship will never be exactly what it was before, but I think it might actually be better this way. Honest and respectful feels more loving than manipulative, and controlling even when it was well-intentioned. Her words captured something important about the transformation we had all undergone. The crisis had destroyed unhealthy family patterns that had persisted for decades, creating space for more authentic relationships based on choice rather than obligation. Jake, who had been employed steadily for 8 months and had recently moved into his own apartment, offered his own reflection on the experience. I spent years thinking that family meant never having to face consequences for my actions, he said. Learning to take responsibility for my own life was painful, but it was the only way to become someone worth having a relationship with. The most profound change was in my own understanding of family loyalty and love. For years, I had believed that caring for family meant absorbing their demands and sacrificing my own needs for their comfort. The crisis had taught me that genuine love requires protecting each other's dignity and autonomy, even when that protection involves difficult conversations or consequences. As I looked around my dining room table that Thanksgiving evening, I felt gratitude, not just for the reconciliation we had achieved, but for the painful growth process that had made it possible. My family's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also freed me from patterns of manipulation and control that had limited all of our potential for authentic relationship. The trap I had set for my family had ultimately trapped our dysfunction, creating space for something healthier to grow in its place. Sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting boundaries, even from the people we care about most. True family means choosing to build relationships based on respect rather than obligation, honesty rather than manipulation, and love rather than control. The experience taught me that forgiveness does not mean accepting continued mistreatment, and family loyalty does not require sacrificing personal autonomy. The strongest families are built on mutual respect and voluntary commitment, not guilt and obligation. When someone tries to manipulate your kindness, the most loving response for everyone involved is to protect your boundaries and require better behavior. I learned that being alone in a peaceful home is infinitely better than being surrounded by people who do not respect your basic rights as a human being. Sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who understand you the least, and protecting yourself from their dysfunction is an act of wisdom rather than selfishness. My house remains my sanctuary, but now it is also a symbol of something larger, the right to determine your own life course without interference from people who believe their opinions matter more than your choices. Family relationships are precious, but they must be built on foundations of mutual respect to survive and thrive. The security cameras that caught my family's betrayal now provide genuine security rather than surveillance evidence. My home is protected by boundaries that are clearly communicated and consistently enforced, creating space for relationships based on choice rather than manipulation. Every day, I am grateful for the strength I discovered during that crisis, the support I received from unexpected allies, like Uncle Robert, and the professional guidance that helped transform a devastating betrayal into an opportunity for authentic healing. The trap I set for my family ultimately set all of us free from patterns that were destroying our capacity for genuine love and connection. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to manipulate your kindness or take advantage of your generosity? How do you balance caring for family with protecting your own boundaries and well-being? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others who might be facing similar family manipulation. Find these insights. Subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and building healthier relationships. And share this with anyone who needs to hear that protecting your boundaries is not selfish, but necessary for genuine love to flourish. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to protect your own peace and dignity in all your relationships, especially the ones that matter most.